Hello, folks. Welcome back to World War II TV and the last show of this week. And I've been busy scheduling things for next week because there have been a couple of changes with the schedule. John McManus is joining me on Monday for a discussion about the end of the war and a few other subjects that will come up there. But anyway, we finished this week of Norwegian themed shows with a look at the Viking Battalion, Norwegian American ski troops. Erik's father was one of the 99th. Along with his colleagues, he has done incredible work making sure their story is not forgotten. There are various links in the description below to the Facebook groups, the website, and films that Erik has been part of. So I'll bring him in now. Good afternoon, Erik. Welcome to World War II TV.
Good afternoon. I'm so happy to be here.
So when I have a show with a historian, I often ask them, a new historian, I say, so what's your connection, or how do you label yourself? But as I said there in the top of the show, it's a family connection. This story is absolutely 100% personal for you, isn't it? Because you've been doing it pretty much, I guess, all your life that you've been aware of this story.
Well, yes and no. Yes, all my life I've been the son of a World War II veteran who served in this battalion, and 30 of those years were in service. Between my wife and I, we have 60 years of service. She's a retired officer as well. But I have to say that I got kind of caught at midlife on the bug for this. I grew up in Southern California, away from any of the big enclaves, not Seattle, not greater Twin Cities or anything. So I really, people would tell Norwegian jokes, and I just didn't have the context for it. Like the joke about there was a Norwegian who loved his wife so much that he almost told her, that kind of thing. Well, after doing this a while, I came away with an appreciation that, as an icebreaker to say, the Army did a special experiment in World War II, and they took all the stubborn people in the Army and put them in one battalion, and what do you know? They were all Norwegians.
Well, so I hope that isn't all the puns and jokes out of the way, but it's a great reminder that essentially it takes all types to make an army. And I think one of the things people who are regulars of the channel will know is I hate those sort of labels we have over campaigns of this is an American campaign, this is a British campaign, this is Canadian, because a unit as we're talking about tonight reminds us that there are people from all walks of life and all ancestral backgrounds all fighting together. So we'll bring up the slide straight away, and I'm going to hand over to Erik to take us through this. And basically, I'm looking forward to this one because it brings everything together. It brings the Norway week with a good old study of the ETO and American sort of training and organization methods. So over to you, Erik.
Thank you so much. Well, I'm Erik Brun. I am the former president, and I'm current board member of the educational foundation based on this unit. We took over from the veterans in about 2011. The big piece of our social outreach and historical work is done through our Facebook group. We have about 2,700 members, which is well over twice the total number of battalion members. Next slide, please. It started, to gel on 2011 for me. My wife and I lived in Capitol Hill, about 11 blocks from the Capitol. My wife was assigned to National Guard Bureau as a logistics officer. I was in the DC National Guard at the time in the J4 office. But my father called and said, "Hey, we're coming to DC. There's an event at the Norwegian Embassy over Memorial Day weekend." Something about his unit in World War II. My dad was never a joiner, but he did keep in touch with a couple of his veteran buddies. But he never really got involved with the Veterans Association. It wasn't in the American Legion. I think he subscribed to Disabled American Veterans just to get information about his VA claims and stuff. But one of his old Army buddies was John L. Christopherson, was in charge of a reunion in 1995. I was living in Phoenix at the time, and I went up to Denver to be my parents' escort for that event. And they were 75 at the time. You know, I wanted to make sure they got through it. So that was really my first exposure to lots of old men like my dad, and lots of them looked like my dad. That was kind of interesting. But you know, in 2011, it was kind of the end of my career, and I had never really deeply thought about the 99th as anything special. That the 100% of my World War II veterans were 99ers, because right. So so he was born in Norway in 1920. They came over as a young child, grew up in Wyoming and Washington State as a Norwegian immigrant in communities of Norwegians. They had a high school Norwegian in as a foreign language. He took Norwegian and Scandinavian Lit in University of Washington. He was where he majored in international business. So he started his college career in early 1939. And of course, the mobilizations had started to begin at that point. The end of October, 1940 is when the Selective Service Act began in the United States. And he mentioned that he'd always go to the periodicals section of the library, and spent, just a voracious reader to the end of life. He was reading 4 or 5 newspapers a day. Well, he had tried to volunteer after Pearl Harbor, but was rejected. He had applied to Little Norway, the Norwegian Air Force program in Canada. And time goes by, and on December 7th, 1942, he receives his draft notice from the American Army. So, and as it turns out, the following Monday, he receives his acceptance letter from Little Norway, but he went with the American Army. So now, 70 years later, here we are at the Norwegian Embassy. Next slide, please. And, the 99ers there, and these are the living 99ers who could make it. And as it turned out, the foundation had worked with generous Norwegian donors to make it possible for them to be there. They received the Defense Medal, which was struck after the war, and was available to service members of all nations who had participated in Norway, in operations around Norway. So, thinking back as a kid, I would always ask him, "Hey, Dad, tell me an old Army story." That's what he called him. And he would tell the funny ones. And I guess that really shaped my view of the military. It drew me into service, actually. And I've always been very interested in the droll little funny moments in my career, and kind of use those to kind of navigate. But the happenstance ones is like a story of a ski trooper who exploded a can of beans on an Arctic stove in his tent at 10,000 feet in 4 feet of snow. And here he is crashing around, trying to, trying to, of course, he didn't put on his snowshoes before he escaped the tent. So that made it even funnier. Or the story of this puppy that was gifted to the platoon. And here they are at Camp Hale, and they're marching up into the mountains, and the puppy takes off after a bunny rabbit, and then focuses on the mule string of 10th Mountain Artillery Unit, and it scatters them all over the mountainside. And of course, that puppy ended up being kind of a problem, because the first sergeant wouldn't let it eat with the dining facility, so they had to spend their entire canteen money on their pet. But there was, one of his little kind of thoughtful stories was he remembers being on a train and traveling in uniform, and there was this other trooper who was from Montana, and they got to talking, and he said, "Yeah, I'm in this Norwegian unit at Camp Hale," and he goes, "Yeah, I've heard about you guys. We might go to Norway sometime together. Someday." Just little things that kind of stuck out to him while he was. But those are kind of the things that frame my mind. The rest of the weekend had a formal dinner that the ambassador hosted. The MC was a major general from the Norwegian Army. So many events that weekend. It was exhausting. I mean, I was younger. These guys are in their 70s and they're getting run around DC in the summertime. So. But why a Norwegian battalion? Why out of the American Army that had 900 infantry battalions? Why? And this never really kind of entered my mind. I had always it was a statement of fact. Yeah, I was in the Army. It was Norwegian battalion. Okay. So 3 months later, I retired, and being in DC, that kind of gave me an unusual opportunity, and I started going to the National Archives, just kind of cold calling the place, just seeing what I could find out. And I spent many days there. Later, we moved to my wife's next assignment in Arkansas, and I enrolled in University of Arkansas Little Rock for a master's in public history. And of course, I used the unit as the focus of my studies. So 14 years later, here I am, a co-author of a book about the 99th Battalion and the opportunity to deal with all of these people, all of the veterans themselves, but also their family members who come into the Facebook group saying, "Hey, I think my dad was in the Army." And yeah, here he is. He's on a morning report. Boom. By the way, he was in D Company, and D Company was the weapons company, and the weapons company had mortars and heavy machine guns. And a heavy machine gun's a 30 caliber machine gun that's water cooled and can fire for an hour, without a break. You take people from walking through the door and try to give them, this. What does that mean? What's the lived experience of that soldier?
Yeah.
But what we did in our book is that we took all of the known published sources that were out there, like this book that was published in Norway and later mailed to the soldiers, was written by the unit, but that was 100%. Well, actually, D Company had some smart people because they were the weapons company. They had the Jeeps. That's why they're smart people. They did their own book, so we've got that collected in there, and then we have collected writings of different veterans, their stories, their individual personal stories, or their attempts at telling the story of the battalion. So that is intended to be as a source for veterans. And you mentioned, what's the future? That is our contribution to the future. The fact that we got something like that out there.
I mean, it's very gratifying that I'm part of lots of Facebook groups. And I think people a few years ago thought they would all sort of collapse once the veterans generation passed away. And yes, sure, veterans aren't using the pages themselves very much now, but the families have moved forward with it. And we're seeing more life than ever before in these Facebook groups and other sorts of forums. It's kids and grandkids and junior researchers. The sharing of information is never been better. So and by the way, folks, the links to the book are of course in the description below, but back to you.
Well, but we're following a long lead. There was a Norwegian author who was actually a resistance worker herself, Gerd Nyquist, who had that same question, why? So she went and did oral histories and interviews with veterans back in the 80s, and she published in Norwegian. The veterans themselves took hers and her book and then kind of brute forced it into a translation. Upside down. And the foundation had already been almost done with this when I came along. They had actually taken that and added 80 pages of photographs,
right,
and republished it with the family's consent to have those available out there for those families who are just kind of coming along at the end now. Telling what the rest of the story, we let the veterans talk in our book. I'm here to talk about what I've learned that maybe the veterans didn't really have access to. So,
yeah.
Next slide, please. So, in those 14 years, I've come across one guy that I think is responsible for a lot of things. Raymond Lee was in 1941, he disembarked a Pan Am Clipper flying boat at LaGuardia Waterside Terminal after finishing his 2 years as the defense attaché in London. And his first contact with his new office at the War Department was a bit shocking because he landed on December 7th. Lee had spent the last 2 years as the eyewitness to the final rise of Hitler, the avalanche of events culminating in the invasion of Poland, the Denmark, Norway, the invasion of France, and the fall of that democracy in 1940, the return of Churchill to the center stage. He saw the expatriate armies gathered in the United Kingdom, the navies, the creation of commandos, the orders to set Europe ablaze. He was in the front row seat for all of that. So he steps into Washington, D.C. as the new acting G2 of the War Department. So a senior intelligence officer, fresh off the airplane boat, the boat plane, whatever. So next slide, please. So as kind of an example of what he saw, I really feel that London guided his thinking. England had become this kind of center of multinational resistance, the Poles, the Yugoslavs, the French, the Norwegians, King Haakon, right? And of course, the king, when he came, he brought the fourth largest merchant fleet in the world, the largest, the newest tanker fleet in the world to London with him. But the Norwegian army was kind of, caught up in Scotland and trying to, find their soldiers coming off the boats as refugees or expatriates wherever they can get them. Out of that came Independent Company Number 1, and this was based on the British independent companies, the kind of pre-Ranger experience. That company served with distinction. It became named after its late company commander, Linge, and was a conduit and back and forth across the North Sea on missions, either covert or as raids. So that was kind of what was in his head. So now, 2 weeks after he arrives, he takes the time to write a letter to the Chief of Staff of the Army, General Marshall. And this is at a time that the active Army had gone from 190,000 soldiers to 1.5 million in the span of 2 years. And that's really kind of staggering. The entire National Guard had been activated at that point, and those divisions virtually doubled the size of the Army in the course of a couple of months. So next slide, please. So Lee brought this memorandum out. So under the auspices of the War Department, International Combat Force recruited of aliens in the United States, big grand title there. His goal was to create units of homogeneously of nationalities to provide easy and rapidly men for espionage, sabotage, military purposes in connection with their native lands. And this is all in one letter. And he cites the worldwide propaganda value of a unit like that. You know, the covert and overt operations, presence of an advanced guard and landing operations. And in this letter, cites over a dozen different nationalities that could happen. But there was a problem, and that was that by law, aliens could not enlist in the American Army, nor could they be drafted. So since the early 1920s, there has been no native foreign language speakers entering the American Army. And he saw that as a very practical problem. So he outlined a plan where he and the chief of personnel of the G1 could take steps to propose legislation and get it passed that would change that and make approximately 300,000 men of those backgrounds available for service, and to bear arms against their common enemies. Of course, he was selfish. He had his own selfish reasons in doing this, because he looked at the lack of native language and cultural awareness in the American Army as a real detriment, a real problem if you're going to try to do those kinds of operations. So that and there are a series of dates and titles as the correspondence is going back and forth, but it culminates in May, where they approved the 99th Battalion. Next slide, please.
And it's interesting, Eric, because we had this perception now that the Britain stood alone myth of 1940, but at the time, General Lee being in the UK in those formative years, Britain was celebrating all these peoples from around the world who were coming to fight the war. It was celebrating its Indian troops marching down Pall Mall, and its Norwegians and its Czechs and its Danes and French and everybody else. And it's only in the years after the war where we've kind of pushed them aside. But back at the time, everybody was recognizing, well, in the UK, they were recognizing the usefulness of these foreign contingents, not just as personnel, but as specific, with their specific talents.
Yeah. Let's not leave out the Gurkhas.
Yeah, the Gurkhas. Yeah, I mean, I could list all the nations, but I'd be here all night. But my point stands, I think. But yeah, people loving this show, by the way. Back to you, Eric.
Oh well, thank you so much. So August 15th, Camp Ripley, Minnesota. That is where the activation takes place. But in true Army form, if you look at the morning reports for that day, they obviously cleaned out the sick bay. It was a multinational array of people who got piled into the barracks to hold up the flag. But the next day, a cadre of 36 soldiers arrived from the 6th Infantry Division to be that skeleton that fleshed that out. And by the end of the month, they had 266 soldiers who'd arrived. There were directives to be circulated throughout the Army, posted on bulletin boards and in unit newspapers, but also distributed at all the reception centers about the 99th. And by the end of September, they were almost at 500 soldiers.
Wow.
Actually, and Lee wasn't around to see this personally. He only had a 6-month tenure, but I really feel that he had, a direct creation of this battalion, but it goes a lot broader than that. Next slide, please. So some of the things that all occurred during his tenure. The 1st Filipino Battalion. And this is Filipino spelled with an F. This is to differentiate these soldiers from the Philippine Scouts, the indigenous soldiers fighting, and currently, had been fighting the Japanese at that time under the American command. But this battalion started in Camp San Luis Obispo, which is my hometown, actually, here. And they, as this battalion, there had been a long tradition of scout units, Indian scouts in that legal precedent was used to create the Philippine Scouts. But that battalion grew to 7,200 men in 6 months. They fielded a regiment. They started a second regiment, but ended up deploying a reinforced regiment, a separate battalion, 30 civil affairs teams of Philippine soldiers, and a group that they called the mission men. And these men staffed the 1st Special Reconnaissance Battalion and put 100 clandestine radio stations in the Philippines in submarine insertions. And I have another author for you, Marie Vallejo.
Yep, she's been on the channel. She's alumni. She's been on.
Oh,
she's done
fantastic!
Here.
Well, yep. I'm so glad to hear that. We've met a couple of times, and I've been able to do presentations based on her work. That was the first unit that really got going. Then the military intelligence training centers at Camp Savage, Minnesota, and Camp Ritchie, the Ritchie boys. If you haven't done them yet,
we haven't done them yet, but it's on my list, Eric. It's just a matter of time. We haven't done the Greeks either. We've done the Nisai a bit. But
I was talking to one of the board members yesterday, so I'd be happy to help you. So 30% of the Ritchie boys were Jewish Americans who would not have been, or expat Jews, who would not have been able to be drafted prior to his intercession. The 99th at Camp Ripley, but at the same time, the Japanese soldiers who had been disarmed in December of 1941 in Hawaii landed in Oakland and activated as the 100th Infantry Battalion. So you got the 99th and the 100th are both of a flavor. And of course, then the 442 was raised in the United States, but there was also a precedent of the 100th Battalion maintaining its designation of 100th when the 442 caught up to it. The 101st was an Austrian experiment, and this also showed that the Army did lousy homework in defining what an Austrian was, because many of their maps were a little older. And you didn't get the homogeneous target like you did with the Norwegians
right.
when you went from Serbo-Croats to German speakers. But they were truly trying to find the German speakers, and many of them went through Camp Ritchie afterwards when the battalion broke up. But there was a Greek battalion, and by the way, it was later renumbered the 122nd because that was the anniversary of independence. Coming up, so there's political warfare going on here. It's these things, it's, as you guys love to do, a box in a box in a box.
Yeah.
Ironically, Foreign Legions is what the file title for many of these files is. That's the in-house name that was being used to describe the units. I also ran across, in doing this research, I also ran across a series of interdepartmental committee for foreign nationalities problems, and with members from the War Department, COI, OSS, OWI, Donovan's Poole and Wiley and McLeish and Cranston and Rockefeller and Lahan. We're all on the 26 sets of meeting notes that I've been able to run down. So a lot of work there. But back to Minnesota. Next slide, please.
Yeah.
So now it's the last day of September. There's a blizzard comes up. All the tents at Camp Ripley collapse, and the unit moves from Little Falls to Fort Snelling. Fort Snelling had a convenient trolley stop for the light rail went all the way into Minneapolis from the post. I love this picture, but I also know the gentleman there, and if there's anybody in our followership here who knows who that is, put his name in we'll come back and see if you got it right. They were working through it. So this gave them a chance to kind of sort through the people that they have. And of course, the senior person was a captain. He was kind of earmarked as the battalion commander. So he is training up a battalion from scratch. And oh, by the way, these soldiers were coming directly from reception stations. There was no time for soldiers to go through what at that point was called the replacement training centers. Replacement training center is doing what it's supposed to. It is creating a replacement part to add to a unit when the previous member fails. Okay. Otherwise, the peacetime was still going on, where soldiers would be enlisted and directly report to a unit and receive their basic training from their NCOs. But their lieutenants arriving were trying to figure out how to lead, and their captains were trying to figure out how to manage companies, and the senior captains trying to figure out how to be a battalion commander all at the same time. And you're trying to build excellence, but you're also trying to make what we today call a ramp strength.
Yep.
Enough bodies to go down to the ramp and get on the airplane. Those are competing things.
We have a guess about the person in the photo. Irene thinks he's really Swedish, and his name is Wendt or something like that. I believe he was the one that went on to join the OSS.
Oh, Irene, I love you. Yes. Well, that's kind of the tie. He's the guy. He's that Forrest Gump kind of character who just shows up everywhere. But he'd run away to sea and had been torpedoed in the Caribbean, and next thing you know, he's in the Army.
Wow. Okay.
So the Army, the unit continued to grow. There were 25 soldiers who had been in the 3rd Infantry Regiment and were transferred from Newfoundland. So the unit gets orders for Camp Hale, and by that time they've reached over 700 soldiers. So this is Camp Hale, and Camp Hale was chosen to be the Mountain and Winter Warfare Board. It was built in 6 months. They had to wait for the permafrost to loosen up in April before they could start construction. But it's a city for 15,000 with roads, gymnasiums, stables, barracks, PXs, water distribution, phone exchange, rail spurs. The whole shooting match was built in 6 months. And it was also built at an altitude of about 9,400 feet.
Wow.
For 14,000 soldiers. So meanwhile, that's going on. My dad gets his draft orders. He proceeds to Fort Lewis. Next slide. And he joins the battalion for Christmas dinner at Camp Hale. So from 7 December to Christmas dinner, that was his training before he was in the battalion.
Wow.
So let's see. Yeah. So the unit trained at Camp Hale, about 840 soldiers by the end of December. My dad remembers after that dinner, they marched to church services. The battalion was 95% Lutheran. But so by the end of January, they were at 973, which is almost battalion strength. They were authorized an overage of about 25%. So for to allow for training losses and an opportunity to wash people out without affecting the unit. But ski accidents, medical problems, you've got lots of reasons for people to fall out of the battalion over time.
Just a question that came in from Andreas, Erik, about at this point, the various people that are coming in from various depots and camps and units that were across the country, are they under the impression that they are going to be participating in some kind of invasion of Norway, or do they just think they're joining the American army without any kind of specific promises?
Well, what the army did after Pearl Harbor was they basically gave up on doing recruiting. They didn't have to. Yeah. When you had to register, especially like you just stepped off the boat, as an example, a friend of mine, a friend of Dad's, TW, he stepped off the boat after 3 years at sea in a Norwegian cargo ship, and 2 weeks later he was at Camp Hale because he was had to be a. They changed the perception for the draft to, if you were in the United States, you were fair game.
Right.
No citizenship challenges there. So he arrived, didn't speak a lick of English. My dad spent the next months training, going through and translating an infantry manual together. And that was how he learned English. And Dad ended up a PFC and he ended up a staff sergeant. So Dad did a good job. But to really, yeah, the soldiers, knew they were intentionally there. By the time they got to, the way it would have worked was because TW was a Norwegian sailor when he was presented to the draft board. They already had a referral notice saying, send those here. It's supposed to be an offer, but I think they didn't bother to be too finicky about that. So when they arrived, they assumed that was what was going on. It was, there's certainly plenty of talk about that,
right,
in the British camp, you had General Thorne in Scottish Command, who's the Scandinavia was his AOR, so he was responsible for coordinating all of the actual planning, but as well as working with the deception planning concurrently, because you got to keep all that out there together. So in the end of April, the battalion was given a short notice to load all their gear in the trucks for a supposed climbing exercise, rappelling training. Well, it turns out they went to Camp Carson, Colorado, and Camp Carson, Colorado, they set up their tents, and the next thing you know, the president was in front of them, because the president was on a Western tour by rail, and but for some reason, the president talked to the Norwegian battalion in their full field Alpine gear. And oh, by the way, the color guard was the Greek battalion, both flying Norwegian and American flags and Greek and American flags. And it was covered by the press. Yeah, kind of makes you think, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So that's April of 43. Well, what else is going on in April of 43? You have the man who never was kind of going on about then. You got lots of deception play.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, head of Husky. Yeah. Of course. Yeah.
So okay. Now, next slide. Let's see that one. So the battalion finishes its exercise. Oh, by the way, I forgot this one. In May, there was a magazine called Pix in Australia, and what do you know, if they didn't run a square-jawed sergeant in herringbone tweed combat jacket with the title "Exiles Fighting Norway's Exile Fighting Sons." And the follow-up article inside had a picture layout of Norwegian Avengers prepare for action. And now you get to open source intelligence. If you just throw that meat on the table, and next thing you know, the Italian or somebody's embassy who's fronting for the Germans or Italians is sending that vital material back to the front, or back to the Abwehr, or back to whoever's gathering it. So he kind of brings up questions in deception plans, and I really love the idea of talking to your catchment here, because somebody may have the missing piece.
Yeah,
Said, I got that file.
that it raises questions about possibilities in that time of the war. Yeah, no, brilliant stuff.
Yeah. Well, and then just after that, these gentlemen show up in uniforms and business suits, and they start interviewing the soldiers about would they be willing to accept dangerous assignments. And the OSS took 80 of the Norwegians. And the Greek battalion commander actually cut a deal for the keepers of his unit. Now, his unit started 6 months after the 99th, and they were, much behind the power curve for people. So he said, "I'll give you my picked guys if you let me come." So if you look at the records, the 122nd is transferred to the OSS, and by Army records, it shows up in Cairo as a mailbox. But so the OSS was starting the operational group program. So you already had individual agents, and later you'd know the 3-man Jedburghs. But the next, the other leg of the stool were the OGs, the operational groups, which today is the Special Forces A Team. And my favorite book to get you into that subject a little bit is "You're Stepping on My Cloak and Dagger," written by Roger Hall. Well, Roger Hall was the second in command to Colby in Norway in 1945. And this
I knew the name. Yeah, that's where I get.
Well, this is his personal experience, and it's kind of like that Casino Royale movie by Woody, whatever his name is, Allen. It's really tongue in cheek, very kind of bawdy, but his experience going through the OSS recruitment, training with the OSS to include the Norwegians and the Greeks, and his deployments overseas in those missions. But a great kind of backdoor storyline. So then the unit was alerted for deployment, and they went overseas. So they originally arrived in Scotland. A whole other story about, by the way, they were originally planned to go to the commando school, but the same decision that ended the operations for the 29th Ranger Provisional, turned them off too. But I see in the schedule that they were due in to the commando school. My father had heard the officers saying that's where they were going when they were on the ship. So it was just kind of, oh well. But that saved them from Normandy. Saved them from Normandy, the beaches, that is. So but they're alerted for deployment. They go to the UK. They arrive. They are initially attached to 5th Corps as a direct report, because the question is, what is a separate battalion? Why? Because if you look at all of our stuff, the foundation is 99th Infantry Battalion, separate. Well, and in the American Army, the battalions were actually just a subset of a regiment. The regiment was the standard thing. Regiments number 8M companies, and those were divided into battalions. So in order for a battalion of soldiers to survive just administratively and logistically, you needed to plus it up with what it got from its bigger organizations here. So here you've got an example, and this is from a 30th Division bookplate. They're showing the layout of 3 regiments up front and a reconnaissance troop and the special units, but they actually have a place for special battalion, separate battalions called out in their layout there. So the 99th had a logistics cell. They had their own trucks, which an infantry battalion, an infantry company had 1 or 2 jeeps. That's a leg infantry company. All the other jeeps and belong to the weapons company to move their mortars and heavy machine guns. The battalion had a handful of trucks. This was a leg unit, and they relied on the quartermaster corps to come by with truck companies or later transportation corps to move units around the battlefield. But that's where the separate comes from, because of those 900 battalions, I think there were 2 separate units that got combat honors.
Right.
Yeah, out of 900. Let's see. Miss anything? Okay. Yeah. Okay. So so the 99th saw service as a direct report to First Army headquarters, and this is a lovely map that is from. It was the end of war souvenir map published by the First Army headquarters, but I thought it showed the route really well. The battalion. Let's see. In prior to the invasion, the battalion is tasked by First Army headquarters to provide a 50-man security detachment, and that was in May. They crossed the channel on June 17th, and I'm sure you know what that meant. They sailed into the Channel storm.
Yeah.
So they were saying that even the former war sailors were having a hard time on that trip. So they finally arrived. The first assignment for the battalion was basically a security operation in Cherbourg. They took over from the 4th Infantry Division when there were still some holdouts in the city and a couple of bastions. But that and then the next month they were assigned to the Provisional Ranger Group in Normandy as additional security force, doing kind of coordinate sweeps, clearing out any holdouts or German soldiers hanging out with their girlfriends. But then the breakout and things began to move. So the 99th was handed back and forth as kind of a seasoning to different operations, or there's a whole series of troop lists where you're jumping back and forth to either cavalry groups or this or that. But the first time that they go into combat themselves was when the First Army kind of got up to Paris and did a side slide along the Seine to as a blocking move to close off the retreat for the German armies engaging the British at that point, or the 12th Army Group, or the 21st Army Group. I'm dyslexic. That happens. So their first fight was at Elbeuf. Kind of had a hard start in that in the staging prior to this, there was an accident. There was a truck that hit an anti-tank mine during a change of guard mission. So the first 4 casualties in combat environment were really through an accident there. But that was kind of a shocker just days before this engagement. But here you have an overlay from the 2nd Armored Division of the approach to Elbeuf, the 99th on the left, the 41st, 2nd of the 41st on the right, and it's a 4-kilometer walk up as the map shows you, and say, hey, we're there. It's great, right? Well, if you read the book, the book has lots of personal accounts of that, and this is truly when the battalion soldiers saw the elephant, an old American Civil War term.
Yeah.
That this was their real first experience, and it was traumatic. So they from there they had a little time off. You had the they moved to an area just north of Maastricht, and I know this is impossible to see, so you go to the next slide. And we see on the first day, just north of the suburbs of Maastricht, the A Company is paired with the 66th, the B and G companies of the 66th, and they secure the jump off area. They kind of clear the road. And the next map, we've got a go ahead. The next 2 days, just a classic armor infantry. They're riding on the decks. There's a second armor division officer who was quoted as saying something to the effect of, this is the only damn infantry unit we have trouble keeping up with. And that's kind of entered the lore of the battalion. But that whole operation kind of culminates at Stockholm. And this is occurring simultaneously to Market Garden, kind of providing that supporting pressure on the rest of the line, taking advantage of the distraction. So they have a little while off, but as the army is lining up on the west wall, and that's the red dotted line there. That's the German defensive positions that had been so much talked about. The first big win in that would be the city of Aachen, the traditional first capital of Germany, and lots of cultural significance. So this map, when I got it, I was just kind of trying to get my head around it. I had a lot of trouble. So basically, and I apologize, I'll have to do like colors different, but there's a white line on the lower right-hand corners, and that is actually a division boundary and a corps boundary simultaneously. So you have the 19th Corps to the north and the American 7th Corps to the south, but you have the 1st SS Panzer Corps trying to run the gauntlet through along that road to get to the city of Aachen itself, to reinforce but not relieve the defenders who had been basically given a Stalingrad order at that point. The next slide, it makes it a little. This is what I had to pick apart in my head. You have a 4-kilometer front with 6 battalions of 4 different regiments, 2 different divisions of 2 different corps fighting in that little bit of space. And they fought that way for 10 days. It was just a slugfest, and bombing by both sides. The close air support being the double-edged sword that it is. But the Germans got some licks in too. But this was probably in the memories of the soldiers, this was the most traumatic period of time that they had. Was those 10 days with the 30th. And if you look very carefully, you have an entire battalion of 2nd of the 116th Infantry Regiment. That is an entire battalion stacked behind one in front of the other inside C Company 99's line. So it just incredibly tough fight there.
And was any attempt, Erik, within this? We did a whole series last year about the Battle of Aachen. So we looked at the urban warfare aspect of the city itself. We've looked at the wider West Wall and things like that. But you talked about all this specialized high altitude mountain training the 1990s have. Is there? I guess what the answer is going to be. But is there any sense of trying to utilize that skill set? Because there are big ridges and mountains and forests and valleys in the wider Aachen battle. Or are they just taking their place as a complicated place in the line?
They were. I would say that they were just an extra poker chip that the Army First Army G3 had to say, oh, here you go. Here's a little more effort for you. So and we are actually been very blessed that there is a German historian, living history friend of ours, Volker Dietrich, who has his own Willys Jeep, and he has an American soldier impression, who has been so kind in meeting with our families who are going to that area and giving him a beautiful tour. Oh, great guy. We also had a young man named Christoph who meets folks over in that's called the Canal Drive, the previous campaign. So after this, the battalion returned to 1st U.S. Army, and it returned to a role as a security force directly under the G3. They're organized. I've got their security pamphlet talks about they're the main piece that's available at that level. Because I tried to, like when they did this, when they took that 50-man security detail, in order to get to an infantry soldier for a security detail, the G3 would have to go through a corps commander, to a division commander, to a regimental commander, to a battalion commander, to a company to get a troop. Having that battalion there is really handy. It saves on paperwork. So it's mid-December 1944. They've been doing the security force operations. They actually have one of their companies down at St. Hubert, just west of Malmedy, guarding a German weapons cache. And they get a call. And actually, the troopies were out playing football, and they said, "Grab your light bags, hit the truck. Get ready, we're going." And that the battalion became the head of Task Force Hansen, and Task Force Hansen was the 99th Battalion, the 526th Armored Infantry Battalion, and an anti-tank company towed 73-inch guns. They roll into Malmedy, where the engineers, those damned engineers were, and there was an engineer battalion that was kind of scattered throughout that area. Excuse me.
No worries.
And they were the first American forces to reach him in an organized fashion. They basically ended up fighting in that greater Malmedy area for 30 days in the weather. And they were embedded in the 30th Infantry Division. If you look close, you can see the 99th positions in the center of the map there, with A and C Company forward and B Company in the town itself. They were there to witness the 8th Air Force visit a couple of times and bound the town while it was in American hands. The 30th has had a lot of experience with that. That was a long fight. And, if you want to count as far as being able to survive in winter conditions, they've had a lot of that already. That is where they kind of came in handy, but that's just how to suffer effectively is a collaboration. But then in mid-January, they receive orders to pull out of the line and report to Normandy base section. And of course, base section at this point is like the other side of the world. That's mainly a logistics operation there. And they are supposed to report to a Colonel Edwin Walker. Any impressions by that patch? Does it look familiar at all?
Well, it's a Viking longship like the one parked up the road in Carrington. But also the first Special Service Force Arrow at the back. It's a bit of everything, isn't it?
Yeah, but there's a third element to it.
Okay, no, you lost me now.
It's above the Viking ship.
Parachute. No. Okay, no, I'm going to be glasses on. No, you have to tell me.
That's a black ribbon.
Black ribbon. Yeah.
A Darby's Rangers.
Of course. Yeah. The scroll. Yeah.
Yep. So, give you a little backstory here. Planning for operations in Norway had developed under General Thorn, and that goes back to like 41. He spent the whole time there. September of 1943, the State Department received a message from Ambassador Wynot in London requesting the president's views on a token force of Americans to be included in the Rankin plans for their planning models for the invasion of Norway at the request of Cossack. General Devers had input an outline, and he'd added it would be a regimental combat team plus the recently arrived 99th Battalion in the plan. so they got baked in at the very beginning. That was actually approved because it went directly from the embassy to Washington State Department and to the president before the War Department knew anything about it. So that also speaks to the level of staff work that was going on in London in the American Army in 43. October of 44, there was a contingency plan reevaluated, and they found that no available separate regiments were available that were deemed suitable. And the solution they arrived at was the creation of a regiment out of whole cloth in theater. So the 99th would become the third battalion of the regiment. As we've already identified, the major donor would be the 1st Special Service Force, less Canadians. So the end of their movie, the Canadians march off and everything's done, right? So Walker herds them up to Normandy base section on January 6th, begins officially transfers everybody out of the force and into the new regiment, into the 474th. They have the 552 anti-tank company, which is a whole nother story. This was a tank company created out of whole cloth for the invasion of southern France. The Japanese, the anti-tank company from the 442 took their mission because they hadn't got up to speed yet. But so they existed, so they got tossed in there. But the Rangers. So where did the Rangers come from? You had that wonderful presentation on Cisterna. I really enjoyed that.
Yeah, I'm not sure which actual unit joined it. You have to tell me. Yeah.
Okay. Well, at the end of the Battle of Cisterna, you start with about 1,600 Rangers. You have about 900 on the American side of the lines. 2 battalions had been considered destroyed, 1 decimated. They sent 4th Battalion home with the most veteran, the original Scottish trained commando school guys. They went home with the flag of the 4th Battalion. The other guys all got fed into the 1st Special Service Forces replacements.
Right.
So within the force, you had about 400 Rangers from Darby's time. And they had been scattered throughout. There was no attempt of trying to make separate platoons or anything.
Right.
And Walker actually created this insignia as a way to try to get everybody on board. He said, "We can't send you home. We still gotta be here. Here's everybody gets a bone. Everybody gets." And by April, he'd actually written a history of the new regiment that was really just telling the stories of all the other guys, so they could pass. Everybody could read it. So then that regiment is born. Now they're given initially 90 days to be combat ready. Now keep in mind, none of those officers had really ever served in a regiment before. The force was always the force. It was always this, we made it up on the back of a napkin kind of organization. It's half British, half UK style unit names. Every element had representation from Americans and Canadians throughout. But nobody had ever played the Army game, the standard Army game, the 900 battalion game. So they're trying to figure out how to do that. Halfway through that process, the G3 colonel from the Schaeff G3 shows up and says, "Oh, by the way, you guys are now a counter werewolf operation." And they've taken the regiment and turned them into a motorized regiment. They gave them 30 scout cars, 50 additional trucks, M29s. They took the anti-tank company and made it a tank company. They gave them chaffies. They gave them corps level radios. And the intent was that they could operate behind the FIBA. As the units moved forward into Germany, they would be area coverage, because the Werewolf was perceived as a credible threat. You're doing the radio broadcasts, you're getting intel at different levels. So this was an actual intentional step toward counterinsurgency organization. And
so now they've done about just about everything except going anywhere near mountains, essentially. I mean, it's armored support infantry, urban warfare, kind of river crossings, and now they're in counterinsurgency, anti-terrorist type operations, but still nowhere near a bloody mountain. As we said before going live, the irony of the army and army logic, and it came up in the sidebar, which we talked about before going live. Stuart reminded us the 52nd Lowland Division, which is mountain warfare trained, ended up below sea level in Walcheren. And then they sent a desert warfare unit from Mojave to the Aleutian Islands. So the armies have a track record of sending the specialist troop to the wrong theater for their specialization. But that's somehow we won the war anyway.
Well, and to Kevin's point there, the 99th was training when it first got to Camp Hale. The first other troops there was the 87th Infantry Regiment. This was the growth of the first battalion of ski troops going on in out of Fort Lewis, which, by the way, is pretty much sea level. But they were training up at Mount Whitney Mount Hood. But that cadre of that regiment did go to the Aleutians. The force went to the Aleutians.
Yeah, true.
But a lot of I'm big on irony for that. So that they had those units. The Darby's Rangers guys are all mixed in. 800 additional replacements were fed into the unit, and they had to get done by the end of March. Well, of course, when they arrived at the front, none of the units, none of the higher headquarters really knew this was coming, and that wasn't on their playlist as something. So it turned out that Patton took them as an extra regiment. He did use them for coordinate search operations. As the forces were moving forward. But I talking to my other board members, I use Forrest Gump as an example. Forrest Gump walks into all of these scenes in the movie, Watergate and on down the line. Well, as now a direct report regiment to Third Army, again, they're the first person you call for something you need done quick, because you don't have to go through 7 levels of bureaucracy. They get launched off to Merkers Mine. They are the security force for the 2 convoys pulling the treasures out of Merkers Mine in the Monuments Men movie. That little 3 seconds there on the screen. Yeah, they're there. They also become the witnesses. The medical detachment sends folks to concentration camps to help or to record what was there. And you had a unit like this now has lots of wheels. You got lots of soldiers driving lots of places. We have lots of veterans who reported seeing or being at concentration camps or sub camps or work camps. Impossible to know which ones, really. We do have some that said they were there when Eisenhower visited Buchenwald. But 3 GIs and a quarter in a Jeep, you can go anywhere. So they encountered that, and that was really those experiences really stayed with them. But the unit was on the troop list for. Now I'm trying to think of what Thorne's operational name for the move to Norway was. or the American name for it was Nightlight. They received orders to prepare to move on May 7th. And that had already been carefully played out and planned, the LSTs and whatever follow-on forces.
Yeah.
So the battalion arrives in actually the force units, the 1st and 2nd Battalion land in Drammen on the 4th, the 99th itself and the regimental headquarters in Oslo the next day. They are there for the return of the king. They are the honor guard. So in some of the photos, in the way this picture is to the king's, to my left of the king, there is a solid block of 99 soldiers standing as the guards. They're also throughout the parade route to the castle, doing security. It was very intentional, and if you want to talk. This put American interests directly in Oslo at the end of the war, which had been a very, very British zone of influence. So they turned out to be the best. And this from a political warfare, not necessarily your ski training, but from a political warfare sense, this is an exact match. These Norwegian-speaking soldiers as the King's Guard, there were certain American, there were 99 soldiers who went to the Norwegian embassy in London, and danced with the staff. Once in Oslo, we ended up with a recaptured yacht, and the Crown Prince was a frequent visitor, sailing with the 99th officers around Oslo Fjord. So the next slide, please. This is kind of underlying the greater strategic deception plan game. 350,000 Germans, the amount of German war material and personnel in Norway was still there. And actually, Operation Ripa with the OSS, it was intentional to ensure that those forces could not be try to slow down their ability to move south to join the fight on the continent. So that had always been, part of the discussions, and that little story, 90,000 Russian PWs. That lower right picture is a group of repatriating Russian prisoners of war.
Essentially, what you're doing, Erik, is you're tying up all the shows of the last few weeks into one. We talked about the King's escape on Tuesday. We talked about the Russian POWs on Wednesday. We've talked about the number of German troops tied up. We talked about the OSS in 45. So you're masterfully tying it all up together and putting a nice ribbon on it for the end of this series. So my hat's off to you, sir. Fantastic stuff.
Well, it is truly my pleasure to have somebody sit still this long. But just a little itty micro story out of that one. The Swedish government offered Pullman cars, or passenger cars, for the trains with the Russian PWs, and the Russians turned it down because, of course, these soldiers had surrendered, which meant they were traitors.
Yeah.
So one of the comments I had from one of my Norwegian contacts was they had British people soldiers visit who were there only briefly. They had German soldiers come back and visit, but they never saw any of the Russians. And the question is, what happened to them? Because there were like 400 camps that the Russians were in, and they were all the way up to personal aides to the general, the Wehrmacht, or drivers, all those positions. Because the Norwegians, the first place Russian PWs were used, other than just to starve to death, was a request from the Luftwaffe in Norway for them to do work, because they couldn't get the Norwegians to do anything. So I don't know how many Russian lives were saved, but I don't know how many of them survived their next experience, because they were marked for life as far as a stigma. You know, had they survived, they were sent to prison slave labor camps, if they were lucky, and the rest of their life. When they got out, those years were blank in their social service history. There's a lot of scary thinking about that. Very, very. I'm thinking about, of the 35,000 Germans, how were they being sorted? Who goes to which port? Which side of the line do they return? Are they going to be a West German, or are they going to be an East German? So okay, I'm trying.
Let's move on. It's fascinating stuff, Erik. But let's keep on going.
Yep, I've got you. Okay, so this is down to the political warfare. There were 3 or 4 major parades in Oslo. The American troops actually presented their regimental colors to the king at the end. I saw them when I was there once. This whole new kind of relationship. So one more slide. So, and here is the answer to that question. That is Sivert von Wendt, the famous Swede. Well, he was actually not trained by the OSS at all. He was wounded in the fighting in the Low Countries and pulled out of his hospital in England by his buddies, and jumped into actually Sweden by accident in 1945 as an OSS member. So he's the guy that likes outside of all the lines. But So next slide, please. And this is to show, and I just want to give you a teaser for a chance at the Norwegian OGs. This is a manifest that came to me from the personal collection of Gerhard. What's the name? Gerhard Bolin. Well, Gerhard Bolin was actually the officer over Colby. Colby was the guy on the ground. Bolin was the commander, and he was a pack rat. When his son got into contact with me, holy cow! I'm virtual like a footlocker of paper, and he put this book together for his dad's story. And sadly, Matt is not with us anymore, but his wife is Nancy is a great supporter. But that was great, and of course you've already done this one with Frode.
Did that one. Yep.
The one I'm missing is Canal Drive by Antoni Pisani, which is it's a very light. It's like a chapter excerpt from a future work, but if you can find that, grab it, because you can probably sell it to a 99 family. It's a wonderful, very detailed on the Canal Drive. So this is the personnel list with Bolin, Colby, Langeland, and then the squad's broken down. But next slide, please. Those are the former 99ers in that group. So, and these are the guys that did the multi-kilometer ski trek chased by the Germans. So these are the guys that did the ski infols, and all the way back to the beginning. This is the vision that Lee had when he wrote that letter at the beginning. The political warfare aspect, when they were so deliberate that when they set the charges on the German rail lines, they left American flags and paraphernalia. Because they wanted to make sure that the locals weren't blamed for it. So, I have to say that one of the tremendous supporters we've had is a Special Forces Association. In Camp Hale, Colorado, there's a monument. There are 2 monuments on a hill, Tennessee Pass. So if you go to like Breckenridge ski area and you drive to Leadville, You pass what was Camp Hale, which is just a big flat open area with some concrete buttresses from the gym. But at Tennessee Pass, there's a ski area called Ski Cooper, which was Cooper Hill, and Cooper Hill was the a ski training area for the Army that they built for Camp Hale. Every year there is a ski in. Now, the elephant in the room is the 10th Mountain Division. Well, after the war, the 10th Mountain Division, a certain subset of the veterans of the 10th Mountain became kind of like the 10th Mountain Mafia and built just about every ski area in the United States. There's a 10th Mountain veteran that's associated with that. So there is a tradition of a week-long get-together of skiing, but Friday of that week is always at Ski Cooper, and it involves a serpentine down the hill with flags, and I've got like 40 or 50 first Rocky Mountain chapter of the Special Forces Association that come out in the memory of the 99ers and the OSS guys, because they see that as a heritage event for them. So that, seeing those guys there, and I'll tell you, I was at the Silver Dollar Saloon in Leadville, Colorado, which, oh, by the way, that was the room that Ron went through the MP through the plate glass window, which is why he did not go to the OSS the first time. And sitting at a table with these guys, and I've never felt safer in my life. Big burly guys, full beards. But they have been very supportive of research, and they actually paid for half of the interpretive plaque we were able to put up there. But the monument itself is hilarious to me, because when you read the monument, it doesn't make any sense, because it's really a conversation between a 99th vet and an OSS vet, and they're taking turns doing brags down the rock. So if you know that, it's easy to understand, but until that, it's kind of jumps around a bit. The Norwegian embassy, I've had Colonel Magna Roldal, holy cow, 40-year veteran in Norwegian Special Forces. He's been there larger than life helping us, and every other attaché has been to the events there. There's also a Memorial Day event that is very touching. But we do that with the help of the 10th Mountain, because we were 1,000 guys, they were 14,000 guys. They obviously have a bigger, and they have a current unit flag out there, so the continual new veterans with that history, sensitive to that history, are being produced. So let's see. That's the preview of coming attractions. I don't want to have to go too far on that, unless you want it.
It's up to you. We can keep on going if you want. I mean, or we can do that another time. Do you want to do some questions about this and do that another time, or do you want to carry on doing?
Let's get to questions here. I think I could use a new charge up before I take on a new piece. So
the questions really are, General Lee's concept right at the beginning there, as you say, the payoff of that was the members of the 99th who were in the OSS doing very specifically what they were supposed to do: local knowledge, language knowledge, political specialist training, going in to do that exact thing. The rest of the 99th, as you said, they were there for so many parts of the ETO, sort of bridesmaids rather than brides, possibly. They're kind of on the fringe of things, but as you said, they're pivotal staff, the Elberth part, the Aachen part. Would there have been a better course of trying to fit them more to this job of mountain? As you talked about 10th Mountain, and would there have been a sort of a course of action that would have got them deployed in a role better suited to their specific talents?
Well, I've tried to do that, but then, as I, at least for me, in the totality of war, being a battalion and being of Norwegians is a tool all the way to the end.
Yeah.
You know, whether they're troop listed for anything, because I dove into the deception plans for Fortitude North, but that was all British game. They could have easily used us, but I didn't see them showing up anywhere there. They were there. They were preparing to move toward the departure ports, but they could have included that. But but the fact that they existed at all. Now here's the other one. Like I said, there's this Thorn, and I don't know if you ever run it, the Thorn story about the fact that he was in Berlin between the wars, and he had shown up early for a meeting, and there was a German guy, and they got talking, and it turned out that they'd been on the same battlefield. And of course, they pull out the maps and they're pointing and saying this and that and this and that. Well, that was Adolf Hitler. And supposedly, to his dying day, that was the only British general officer he had known personally. And he always asked about him. And there's the hint in the article I had read was there is no accident that he ended up in Scottish Command, because they knew that he was an amplifier. Anything they wanted to poke Hitler about with Norway, they just had to have him say it. So him being knee deep in the Rankin plans, later the Apostle plans is how they executed. You went from 3 options to 2 options. But after the end of 42, the actual invasion of Norway, the threat was valuable. To engage in it would have been a pain in the ass. But the fact that Norway was a trap is, as soon as they moved there, they couldn't move out, because that would allow the Allies to move in. So now you're stuck with 300,000 soldiers in Navy bases, the whole thing. The largest per capita occupation of any country other than maybe the Channel Islands. But
I mean, and this came up in a discussion with Jane yesterday about the fact that, because Jane was talking about Operation Claymore in 1941 and some of the Narvik events in 1940, is that Churchill and the other people who had a kind of a not a plan, but they envisioned a certain future for Norway in 1940. But by 1944, the thought they had envisaged has moved into something else. Because as you just said there, it has ended up becoming an obsessional thing for Hitler. He has put those 350,000 troops there. So the big picture has changed somewhat. So as you say there, the thoughts of going into Norway have moved on to, actually, let's just leave those German troops in Normandy and we'll concentrate on doing other things that we're doing. So Norway's it's a really fascinating subject, because, as I said, the picture changes as the war goes on as to exactly where its importance sits. And in reference to the fact that the 99th didn't end up doing the mountain stuff, is that we've talked about on this channel a lot, that the difficulty with any kind of military unit is establishing some kind of bond between people brought together. Now that can come from, in the First World War, the PALS battalions in the British Army, of all the men from the same mine or the same cotton mill joining up and going down the street and joining up, or it can come from regional, the National Guard or the territorial units. So at the end of the day, the 99th had that bond of being Norwegian, and that bond is, I guess, what carried them through, even though they didn't perform the role they were perhaps thinking they were going to, and they were earmarked for. They had a bond that took them all the way through, and that you kind of can't. You can issue uniforms to an army, but you can't create a bond if it isn't there. You kind of can't artificially do it. You can sort of with drill instructors and this, that, and the other. But if it's there naturally, which clearly it was with these guys, if there is a bond of, hey, we're Norwegians, and especially because you talked about the whole issue of the fact that they couldn't actually use foreign nationals, they had to overcome that hurdle. A bond has been established.
Oh yeah, and my father was, the you had folks like like Ron Wint, who were off the boat. You had a lot. There was actually a letter from the Norwegian government wanting a list of all the war sailors at one point. But you had the war sailors right off the boat. You had 40% of the battalion, but based on service numbers, because there's a geographical code in the service number. 40% of them were for the greater New York City area, and 40% of them were from the Midwest. And 20% was everywhere else. So those two clumps, but those guys were fresh off the boat. My dad was kind of hybrid. He left Norway as a baby. There were others who had been kind of middling. Actually, my father received his citizenship in the Army. There was a weekly shuttle to the courthouse in Leadville, where they would actually bring a judge up with clerks to process all of the aliens at Camp Hale, and so he was among those. The impact that I see is kind of across the board. These bright ideas of 1942, there were many of them. Yours would have been in 1940. For us, it was 42. In the case of the Foreign Legion battalions, the Austrians didn't work out at all, but the Norwegians and the Greeks, half of all the OG people and I'm not talking about the old guard, the operational group guys in the OSS were from those two units.
Yeah.
And the Greeks, half of them went to Greece, half of them were fighting in Yugoslavia. Very, very active there. Then the Ritchie boys, 30% of the Ritchie graduates were expat Jews. I have an in-law family member who was a Ritchie boy, who had grown up in Heidelberg, and he was an IPW guy, interrogator prisoner of war unit. Those guys were invaluable. Because you can take a guy who went to Long Beach State and took German class, but he'll be lucky to understand German. He won't pick up what neighborhood they're from. Yeah. And the fact that was a Berliner unit that he was supposed to be in, but he's a Bavarian.
Yeah. And they knew the Bavarian folk songs. They knew the things to connect with that German they're interrogating. Yeah. In fact, the German doesn't even know he's being interrogated. I mean, I talk about the Ritchie boys a lot in Normandy, but I want to ask you about the other thing that occurs to me is I've read lots of books about, for example, Italian Americans seeing Rome, or they're seeing Naples, and how even if they are third generation Italians, it brought them home to the mother country. You get the same with German Americans and other, but the Norwegian Americans, obviously a smaller contingent than Italian Americans, and the distinction being that the guys in the 99th are fighting together. So for a lot of Americans, even after the war, there was always that sense of the war being distant. It was either in the Pacific, thousands of miles away from where they lived, or it was in Europe, which is sort of an abstract concept. But the Norwegians who served in the 99th had seen Norway at the end of the war. They had seen Norway. They'd seen bunkers built there by the Germans. They had seen, I guess, some elements of devastation and bombed cities. They'd seen displaced personnel. They'd seen graves. Do you think, you said at the very beginning, you said your father wasn't a part of the association after all. He kept in touch with some buddies, but he wasn't a part of the active kind of reunion setup. But the men that you've spoken to and the family members, the fact that they could bring some of the European war back to America, was that significant to them? The fact that they had that direct understanding of it and could share that with other people, this is what happened to our European brothers, if you like.
Well, I know from what Dad said, he was incredibly he was following the story from the very, from April 40. That probably from Altmark, he was following that, and that was a big part. Certainly he grew up an American boy, but he was very conscious of the Norwegians around him. Everybody had relatives in Norway. His big memory of Norway was a vision of his grandfather, and then to take have him be a bunkmate with a guy who's fresh off the boat and had been at sea for 3 years already as a war sailor. This was much more tangible. We adopted our children from Ukraine.
I get what you're saying. Thank you for sharing this with it, because it's what I love about this channel. It's the emotional aspect of this, and we've talked about the let's not get involved attitude some Americans had in 1940 and Charles Lindbergh and those kind of people. It's not our war, it's Europeans. But as you said, for the men of the 99th, some of whom had just come from Norway, others were first or second generation. It was much more personal. This wasn't a war that was a long way away. It was a war that was where they were from, and I think that and Scandinavians have a strong sense of identity. I'm not saying Italians don't have a strong sense of identity, or Germans, but Norway, it's Scandinavia in general. It's a very distinct type of people over there, I think. As you made those jokes at the beginning there. So it's a really fascinating subject, and we will definitely invite. I hadn't realized how much time had passed. We will invite you back to carry on and tell the OSS story, because there's more to it there. But in the meantime, as I said at the beginning, people can get in touch with you. They can sign up for the Facebook group. They can go to the 99th website. I'm assuming you still want to hear from more family members. I'm assuming that you don't feel that you've finished the job yet.
Oh no, no, it's a never-ending one, and it's always a joy to be able to meet somebody new and try to catch them up. My personal career was military, and I always felt that kind of gave me like being in the room when you're reading the minutes of the meeting or something. My joke is, every policy on the cork board in the break room has somebody's name on it, right? Yeah, not the guy who signed it. I mean, the reason it was written.
Yeah.
But to see, so many things. When they were looking for the regiment to go to Norway for the plan there, before they tried to create a regiment out of whole cloth, they actually had considered the 10th Mountain, because the 10th Mountain was just moving to Texas, the mountainous area outside of Austin, because the mountain thing had run its course. And when the staffers looked at it, because they still had mules at that moment, the staffers looked at it. They said, "Oh, we don't want to mess with that." So, but they'd also been offered to the Burma theater too, and the force had been offered to Burma, as a matter of fact. And
I think that's what one of my takeaways from this presentation is, that the 99th had a sort of a non-linear history, in that there was what they did, but there's also what they might have done or they could have done, and the various branches, the spurs on the track that could have been taken that weren't taken. Whereas you have some units in the ETO that have a very sort of normal trajectory, formation, training, boot camp, troopship, landing somewhere, campaign, go back home. I mean, not that I'm not dismissing the actions of that type of, but the 99th had a really quite extraordinary story, that the werewolf hunting aspect of it in 45, the going off to Norway and being part of that. Yeah, well, we will end the things there, Eric. It's been absolutely fantastic talking to you, and it's wonderful to be able to have someone on who is doing such great work for what appears to be kind of a narrowly focused story, which it sort of is, but it has these strands and tentacles that take it into so many areas. You've brought in the Rangers, you brought in the 1st Special Service Force, you brought in the British attaché to London early on with Lee himself, and the OSS and the king, the Norwegian king you brought in. Ron Hudnall, who I know from years and years ago. Many thanks, Eric. Glad to call you a World War II history friend. So there we are. It's been fantastic stuff. So, Eric, we will set a date at some point to have you come back if you'd like to and talk about the OSS story. But in the meantime, thank you so much for bringing us the story of the 1990, the great photos. I urge everybody who's watching this to go out there and sign up for those groups and check their videos and look at the links and learn more about this, because it's been an eye-opener for everybody. So there we are. So, folks, enjoy your weekend. Sign up for everything you can. Consider becoming a patron or a channel member. Click like and subscribe, of course, and buy my guest books. Visit their websites, as I always say. But, Eric, thank you very much for a very moving presentation. Thank everybody for your comments. I'll see you on the other side of the weekend. Cheers, everybody. Bye.
Bye.